Um, Good evening and welcome to everyone. Thank you very much for coming. This is the CIBSE West Midlands Region Interpersonal Skills CPD Week. And tonight you are joining us for Managing Your Wellbeing. So I am Chloe Agg, I'm your Education and Careers Officer. So if you get involved with the CIBSE committee, you'll probably see my face a few more times. But tonight we're being joined by Dr. Sarah Bell, who is a clinical psychologist and is very experienced in helping others to manage their wellbeing after many years working for her sins with me at Warwick University, as well as at other places, helping students to manage their wellbeing whilst studying. So Sarah and her qualifications and expertise are going to talk to us tonight all about wellbeing and how we can manage ours better. So I will disappear off into the background, but you guys have got the chat function open to you, so do feel free to add questions into the chat, and Sarah will, I imagine, get to them at the end. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much. So welcome everybody. As Chloe said, we're going to be thinking about managing your well-being today. And my name's Sarah. I'm, as Chloe mentioned, I work in the University of Warwick Wellbeing Service, working with students. But I've worked for a number of years as well in NHS mental health services, as well as in some psychology research settings, researching mental health, amongst other things. So today we're going to be generally thinking about your well-being. But first of all, I'm just going to ask you to think about what brought you here today. So why have you come to this session about well-being based on the title of Managing Your Well-Being? What does well-being mean to you as a chartered engineer? What interests you about well-being generally? Or what would you like to change or be different in relation to well-being? And what I would say is to prioritise this element during the session. So whatever important to you, whatever's brought you to this session, to put that at the forefront of what you're thinking about and what you focus on. Whatever I mention is by the by in some ways. So take what you need from what I talk about and what's important to you, because you'll be much more motivated to focus on those things. Okay. So this session is about you. For some people, that can feel like quite an uncomfortable thing if you're not used to thinking about yourself or focusing on your own well-being. And there's no expectation about what you do in this session. So be guided by what feels right for you. But in general, we're going to cover the following. We're going to be looking at trying to develop your wellbeing knowledge. So learn a little bit more about what wellbeing is and how it impacts people and how to manage it. And then hopefully you might get a bit of a better understanding of your own wellbeing needs. And that includes steps to improve your wellbeing, and maybe coming up with some ideas about how you might change your wellbeing so that you can live more the way that you want to live. So in terms of focusing on what you do or what you don't do, chances are you will already be doing lots of things to manage your well-being. It's something that everybody will be doing on a day-to-day basis. Some of the things you won't even be thinking about. So that might be just kind of how you exercise or eat, or just spending time with friends or family, or doing things that you enjoy. Those are the things that you already do. And it's important to try and take yourself a little bit out of that comfort zone of what you're doing already and expand into the things that you could do if you had a little bit more knowledge, support, or guidance. There will always be lots of things, though, that feel out of your reach at the moment, and that's okay, because well-being isn't about perfection. It's about being good enough. So it's about just doing the things that you need to do in order to stay well. So it's about setting yourself realistic goals, and goals that are based on your individual needs and what you actually need in your life at the moment. So everyone will start from a different place. If it feels too challenging to focus on anything other than yourself as a professional today, then that's okay. But I would also encourage you to just be a bit curious about why it's difficult for you to think about yourself and your well-being, and to look after yourself as an individual. And to try and at least do something that takes you a little bit out of your comfort zone. So into those things that you could do with support, without putting too much pressure on yourself to do the things that are really out of your reach at the moment. Okay, so first of all, we're going to think about what well-being is, because it's a term that's quite commonly used these days. It's a bit of a buzzword, and people are starting to take notice of the idea of well-being being important, but actually don't necessarily really think about what it means or what it means for them, and kind of engage with the concept generally. And well-being can be quite confusing because it's often used synonymously with terms like mental health. But actually, mental health is quite a specific part of well-being. It's more focused around your emotional and psychological well-being. And well-being actually includes lots more different elements to just your mental health. And people also use the term mental health to refer to what they mean more as mental illness or mental ill health, which is when somebody has their mental health has deteriorated to such an extent that they're really struggling to function. And that's more where people would start to experience more diagnosed mental health difficulties. But ultimately, if we think about what well-being means, it's about feeling good, but also functioning well. So you might notice that there's lots of people that are functioning well, or seemingly functioning very well, and achieving lots and doing lots. But if they don't feel good while they're doing it, they don't really have well-being. They're just achievers. And really, you do need that balance of both to feel good and to have a well-being. But ultimately, well-being is individual to every person. There's not a one-size-fits-all solution to it. But that being said, there is lots of evidence about what generally helps people to stay well, and what supports people to enhance their well-being. And we will have a look at a few of those later on in the session. So well-being covers every aspect of ourselves. And it includes all of these different areas, some of which we might commonly think about. So, for example, I think probably lots of people would think about their physical health, or their social well-being, whether they're, interacting with people how they want to be. But not everyone thinks about all these areas of well-being, and the fact that we need to really make sure that all of these areas are addressed when we're focusing on our well-being. But also that you've got to somehow get a balance between all these different parts. So you might think for occupational well-being, you want to do a job that you really enjoy, and maybe one that doesn't pay so well, but you've got to balance that with your financial well-being, and knowing what balance of each of these areas is enough to keep you contented and satisfied. And again, that's a very individual thing. So different people will need different elements of each of these parts. And some people will focus more on others. And it really is about you knowing yourself and what's important to you and what fits. And we'll think about a little bit later on how you can really try and build on this part where you're getting in tune with yourself and what you're doing. But one that lots of people don't really focus on very often, particularly in our culture, is spiritual well-being, which is the sense that there's something greater than you as an individual, and that you're part of something bigger than yourself. And being able to kind of really get in tune with your experience in the world that you're in. And that's something that, isn't just associated with religious groups and things like that. It's just a general sense of who you are in relation to the world around you, and can be a really important part that often isn't focused on. So I'm going to ask you just now just to take a moment and think about what keeps you well. And that can be any aspect of your well-being that I've mentioned. And it doesn't obviously have to be linked to your health. So, you know, things that might become more clear in your mind would be things, you know, like how you eat and exercise and those sorts of things. But actually think about anything that brings you joy or helps you to feel calm or helps you to feel energized. And all of those sorts of things give you a good indicator of whether something's good for your well-being or not. And chances are you do lots of these things already. And it's good to keep track of the things you're already doing, because then you know that you're not just starting from scratch and that you're building on a foundation that already exists. So you might think about things like spending time with friends or family, your hobbies, your work, anything that you think contributes to any aspect of your well-being and that is a positive influence in your life. So, thinking about work, most people would probably quite likely be keen to achieve their best in terms of the work they do. And being able to get this sort of optimal performance out of themselves. Now, humans are generally quite lazy beings. We don't necessarily do things without a motivation, because we need to rest and we need to reserve our resources until it will be useful to use them. So in order to kind of perform at our best and use our skills as best we can, we do need a little bit of pressure to nudge us out of our comfort zone and get us to optimize our potential. And this is this area here that we're talking about, but it does require a little bit of pressure. However, we can't sustain optimal performance endlessly. There is a limited amount of resource that we have to use, and we have to sort of essentially oscillate between this place of performance and then more of a place where we're doing what we call rest and digest, where your body can process what it's doing. And this is both your physical body and your mental processing as well. And it's really important to allocate time for this to happen. And it can be a mixture between really doing very little physically and also doing things that you can do so easily that it feels comfortable, that it's not particularly taxing on any part of yourself. And spending time doing these things then really gets you ready and prepares you to once again perform at your best. So take time to sit back and take the pressure off you, because that's actually going to help you perform better. And without these times, anyone is going to start to flag. And that's when you find yourself in this area, when you start to struggle. So if you push yourself too far or work for too long without a rest, you might find yourself in this place. So this is when people start to notice common signs of stress, which include anxiety, difficulty sleeping, feeling tired or lethargic, maybe even stomach pains, difficulty concentrating, difficulty making decisions, generally feeling overwhelmed. And at this stage, you might still be functioning. So you might still be going to work or doing things around the house or kind of getting by, but it's unlikely that you'll be feeling good in this state. And these are warning signs that you're struggling and you're not coping and that something needs to change. If you don't take steps to address how you're feeling at this point, you can find yourself completely overwhelmed or burnt out. And at this point, people really do stop being able to function at all, which is obviously not ideal. And at this point, you really do then have to take yourself back to the rest phase in order to get to a point where you can function again. And if you find yourself at this point, it might be that you're expecting too much of yourself, given your current capacity. Stress is something that's an experience based on the assumption that what is being asked of you is greater than what you're able to do. So to some extent, stress is subjective. What everyone experiences when they're stressed is physically and mentally very real and can be incredibly unpleasant. So I'd encourage you just to take a few moments to think honestly about where you are on the graph right now. So both in this actual moment, but also generally in your life. And try not to be too critical of where you are, but just allow yourself to actually think about realistically where you would find yourself. It's fairly unrealistic to expect that anyone could avoid being in that red zone completely, because we all do find that there are times when we're struggling. But if you find most of your day or week or year is in this zone, it is likely to be having a detrimental impact on your well-being, never mind how much you're enjoying your life. So it's worth just taking a bit of time and sort of noticing where you sit and whether you're actually being able to perform as well as you could if you did give yourself time out where you can recover and rejuvenate. Okay, so I'm now going to introduce the well-being bucket, which essentially represents you as an individual and your capacity to deal with life's challenges. So we all have different buckets, but everyone has a finite capacity within their bucket. There might be different sizes for different people, and how much we can fit in is different for different people, and what kinds of things we can fit in. But ultimately, nobody has an endless bucket. And it's something that changes over time as well. So you might have found that at one stage you had a certain size of bucket and you had a certain capacity, but that has changed one way or another. And that's really why well-being is something that has to be constantly updated and thought about. And there's a constant input-output balance going on that needs to be carefully managed in order to maintain well-being, which we'll think about now. So our bucket's been continually filled with more and more demands. That might be work pressures, financial worries, family responsibilities, illness, or just challenges of day-to-day life. And these are all entering our world and filling up our bucket with stress and tension. And our culture generally does encourage us to keep striving and working hard and sort of almost carrying on regardless. But we all do have limits, and eventually our buckets just overflow if there's too much in there. And that kind of shows in increased stress, illness, emotional distress, and being generally unproductive. So this is the point where you're in that kind of red zone struggling point. And it's not a very pleasant or successful place to be. So then essentially what you want to do is try and manage what comes into your bucket and reduce the amount of contents in your bucket. So that's about preventing things from entering your bucket that you can't deal with or you don't have capacity to deal with, but also about releasing the tension or the overwhelm that you have in your bucket already. And there's a few examples there of the sorts of things people use, like going on holiday or getting some sleep or dancing with friends, yoga, writing your thoughts or worries down, what you eat, recharging your batteries, psychological therapies, those sorts of things all help to keep the bucket in check. And it's about identifying the things that work for you. So which things actually help if you're feeling stressed and overwhelmed? What things actually help you to feel better and bring yourself back from that place where you're struggling? It's important to sort of have an awareness of these things so that you've essentially got a bit of a toolkit to draw upon if you notice that you're feeling overwhelmed at any particular time. So thinking then about well-being management, what we want to do is, as I said, develop skills and knowledge in how to best manage your well-being, and try and make changes that allow you to keep yourself as well as you can, and understand yourself and know yourself. So the first thing to really focus on in relation to well-being is our physical body. And not because that's the most important thing necessarily, but our body is our vessel, and we do need to rely on it in order to function and do well. And it's a good basis to support us with any other aspect of our well-being. I mean, we all notice when we're feeling physically ill in any way, what impact that has on our ability to function generally. And it can affect all sorts of things. So the more we can do to keep ourselves physically well, the easier it is to then focus on the other aspects. And interestingly, we do generally tend to find that it's easier to focus on our car's well-being than we do on our own sometimes. And that's partly because it's legislated that we have to do certain things to keep our cars safe. But also it's quite clear what we do. We know what's good for our car and we know what we need to do. But I mean, if you imagine when you say take your car for its MOT, if the MOT doesn't spot that the brakes are worn down, or the service doesn't change the oil, or you put the wrong petrol in the car, if you're able to get hold of petrol, then you know that the car's going to suffer from that. And you know that there could be quite significantly negative consequences as a result of those things not being sorted. And so we do tend to focus on those things, and we bring in experts, and we know what people need to do in order to make it safe again, and we prioritize that. But we don't necessarily do that with our own selves. It's not something we necessarily focus on, and we're certainly not forced to do it for the most part. However, it is really essential to manage your well-being, to have these basic foundations. So in terms of thinking about rest, as I've already mentioned, our bodies are designed to be active, but we do then need to rest and recover, because our bodies need to process things, as I've said. It is different for each person though, so you do need to really have a sense of what actually is relaxing for you as an individual. So what helps you to feel calm? What helps you to just unwind and deal with the stresses of the day? And that is something that only you can really know. But there are lots of classic things that help people to relax. Taking a warm bath, or reading a book, going for a walk, being in nature, that kind of thing. Engaging in things like yoga, and all those different ideas can really help to encourage you to do your rest and relaxation time. We also need to be physically active as well. So we need to keep our bodies moving. We need to actually use the parts of our body that we have so that we can keep everything essentially lubricated and functioning well. And that needs to be something that we continue to do all the time. Otherwise, our bodies literally do seize up. And one of the other essentials of well-being is sleep. So it's something that generally we do notice goes quite early on if somebody's feeling stressed. It's one of the first things to be affected, and can be affected quite quickly and quite easily. But having a good sleep routine, so that might be something like having 8 hours sleep, having the same sleep and wake times, even at weekends, can really help you to get back on track if you're struggling. And the reason that helps really is because it takes the pressure off your body. So thinking about what is taxing for your body and for your mind, if you just have good sleep, then it's one less thing to take the stress away, and is a really important part of managing well-being. And then finally, diet, and knowing what your body needs and why, and really listening to how your body responds to certain foods, because everyone is really different. And some person might have some caffeine in the morning and it will really perk them up. Another person, they won't notice a difference. And it is just about personal preferences, but also the impact that it has on your body, and just being truthful with yourself about what things are good for your body and which things aren't. And again, only you can really know that. And it's okay to have something that you know isn't healthy for your body because it helps you to feel good sometimes. But it is that sort of everything in moderation, and being kind of honest really with yourself about why you're having something and what you're doing and the choices that you're making. And that's fine to have those choices. So coming back to this idea of well-being management, it's well known that one of the best things to do to develop your well-being is to develop your self-awareness. So that's essentially a process of self-observation where you learn about yourself, you learn what you need and what's important for you. You understand your body and your mind and how you're feeling. And this is a constant process because it's changing all the time. So what you need to do really is to try and develop skills in knowing what you're experiencing in any one situation. Spending more time with yourself. By that I mean actually kind of going within and listening to what your body is telling you is going on for you, because there'll be lots of indicators, both in terms of your physiological experience, the thoughts that you have, the emotions that come up, and they're all our indicators telling us what's going on in our environment and how we're experiencing our environment. And essentially that is who we are as people. We often think that it's our thoughts that really make us who we are, but our thoughts are just creations from our parts of our brain, really. All the other parts are just as important as that. And then it's about taking notice of what you are experiencing. So actually clocking, well, what am I noticing? What do I experience in this moment? And how can I make sense of it? But it's really important to do that without judging yourself for what you notice, because you might find that there's lots of thoughts or feelings that are uncomfortable and that you'd rather not be experiencing. But there's a need for compassion and to not take the thoughts that you have too seriously, and just to allow them to be what they are, and know that thoughts are just thoughts, that they're not necessarily, they don't have as much meaning as we think they do. So one of the best ways to develop this self-awareness is through mindfulness and meditation. Mark Williams, who used to run the Oxford Mindfulness Centre, is a real expert in using mindfulness to support people with their well-being. He says that mindfulness is about knowing what's going on inside and outside of ourselves, moment by moment. And there's lots of examples of Mark Williams reading meditation and mindfulness sessions on YouTube. And there are loads of different ways that you can start to develop these skills. So there are lots of apps that you pay for, like Calm and Headspace are two apps that you can use. But also I found like Calm have done these daily Calm sessions on YouTube, which you can access for free, that just run through, say, a 10-minute meditation, and there's a few different ones of them, and you can I'd say really find somebody that you like the sound of their voice, and that when you listen to their voice, you find it calming and relaxing, and you find it easy to listen to them. And those are kind of guided meditations that take you through thinking about something or processing something specifically. But ultimately, mindfulness is just about being mindful in the moment. So you can do it when you're doing absolutely anything. You can be mindful in the shower, you can be mindful while you brush your teeth, because what it is about focusing on your experiences, your inner experiences, and just noticing what's happening. And I say just, it's not an easy thing to do if you're not used to it. And like lots of skills, you do need to develop it over time. You need to practice it, and you need to kind of keep doing it in order for it to help and for it to be something that you can naturally access when you need to. And so it's kind of a skill, like flexing your muscles and trying to get them moving. You need to do that regularly in order for your body to function in that way. But I would also say there's a lot of podcasts as well that are focused on meditation that you can use as well. So there are lots of free ways that you can do this and explore this world a little bit more. And we're going to do one together now. So this is the Every Mind Matters exercise that you can access on YouTube yourself. And there's the link if you want to do this again afterwards. So I'll just play it now and we can do it together.
So often we're caught up in life's demands with no time to stop, but becoming more aware of your own thoughts and feelings and what's around you, and accepting the present moment, can help improve your mental health and well-being. Doing this affects both the mental and the physical you. Some people call this being more mindful. Focusing on the present means paying attention to your thoughts and feelings right here, right now. Breathing exercises are a great way to focus on the present and be more mindful. Doing this can also help when you're feeling stressed or anxious. This short video will take you through how to do a mindful breathing exercise. Firstly, settle into a natural, comfortable position. When you're ready, take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. Breathe naturally, noticing the sensations of the breath entering and leaving the body as best you can. Allow your shoulders and neck to relax, focusing on your breathing, just being aware of it. Focus on how your body feels. What sensations do you notice? Do you feel your feet on the floor or the feeling of your clothes on your skin? Take this time to pay close attention to physical sensations, from the top of your head right down to your toes. Notice what you're thinking about right now and how you're feeling. Just take the time to notice your thoughts and feelings without judgment and without trying to change them. When you're ready, take one more breath and try to bring this awareness with you into the next moments of your day. Breathing techniques like this one can help to center you in the moment at any time and connect you with the present, which can help if you're feeling stressed or anxious.
So that's just one example of how you can use this technique in day-to-day life, and that's just obviously a very brief example which shows you that it doesn't have to be a long 30-minute meditation to make a difference. And ultimately it's about trying to fit it into your day so it makes sense, and fitting it out around your busy life. And sometimes people find that just doing a few minutes here and there is much easier than having long stretches where they're trying to focus.
So often we're caught up in life's demands.
So I'd encourage you to think, if you did do that exercise, just how it made you feel. Did it make any difference? What was your experience of doing it? And again, try not to be too critical of whatever it was that you did experience, but just to notice it and use that as useful information when you're thinking about whether this is something that makes sense for you at the moment or whether it doesn't feel right for you now. So once you've developed a self-awareness, or as you're developing this, it gives you an indicator of what's going on for you. So it's more helpful to kind of spot where you are on that graph that we talked about, how overwhelmed you're feeling, how much you're struggling, or whether you're feeling well. And getting a better balance means that you need to be able to watch when you're reaching your limit. So knowing how you know that you're starting to struggle, what changes, what do you notice, what are the indicators, both the early on ones and the late on ones. And you need to know what pushes you from feeling on top of things to feeling overwhelmed. So when do you move from being in that optimal performance stage to feeling more overwhelmed? And what are your limits? What do you need to stay well? And these things essentially give you what your boundaries are, because we all will have different boundaries and we all need to know what will take us from one place where we're feeling well to a place where we're not feeling so well. And then once you know what your limitations are, you need to make sure you stick to your boundaries. And that's both in terms of what you expect of yourself, but what others expect of you as well. And this can require saying no, which isn't very natural. We often want to say yes to people where we can, and give people what they need or what they're asking for. But actually, a lot of the time, people wouldn't want you to do that if it's at the expense of your well-being. And if you're able to articulate how much it might be having an impact on you and your well-being, then it can be a much more persuasive argument, and people can help people to realise that actually they may be asking too much of you at that time. It's also about drawing on support from other people. So whether that's relying on people within your family, or whether it's delegating more at work, or whether it's just drawing on the support of experts or people that you might need to get help from. And we'll talk about that a little bit at the end in terms of what support you can get for your well-being. It might also be about planning your time or prioritising what's important and what needs to be done first, but also actually how much time you have available to do any one task, and being boundaried about only allowing yourself to spend that amount of time on whatever it is that you're working on. And it can be really helpful to try and develop resilience. And that's really about trying to enhance your bucket's ability to take the stresses and strains of day-to-day life. Because if you find that you have a very small bucket with limited capacity, it is much more challenging to deal with the inevitable things that will come up in life. And it is possible to develop an ability to take on more. But it's also important not to have a goal of just taking on more and more and more, because it's about getting that balance right and knowing what the right balance is. Mindset can have a huge influence on how we cope with challenges that we face. And the way we take on things and the way we experience them does have an impact on the way we're able to tackle whatever we're facing. So this approach encourages you to have a balanced perspective when you're faced with something, to identify the things that you have control over and the things that you can change, and to take active steps in order to make those changes. And that might be things like talking to your manager, changing your working patterns, changing your working hours so that it fits around your needs. It might be about changing your sleep or doing things differently at home, or having more exercise or eating differently. And making any of those changes that you can, that you know will help you with whatever you're struggling with. But inevitably, there will be things that you don't have control over. And we've all experienced that, particularly a lot during this pandemic, where we've lost control over lots of aspects of our life that we used to choose. And we've had to have some form of acceptance of that. And it's found that if you can get this balance right, where you do accept things that you have no control over, whilst also actively changing the things that you can control, it does help to manage well-being and also develop resilience. And mindfulness can really help with this form of acceptance, because once you are aware of your thoughts and you're able to allow the thoughts to be there, it can be much easier to let thoughts go and decide that you're not going to focus on certain thoughts, whether they're negative or critical, or thoughts that aren't helping you or actually taking you to a place that feels positive. And that kind of thought challenging can be really useful in terms of making sure that you're developing a way of thinking that actually is improving your well-being rather than being a detriment to it. So you might be thinking that lots of the things I've talked about today are things that you've known already, and kind of thinking, well, I know that, but I'm not doing any of it. And that's so commonly the case. Actually, knowledge is not always the problem. Sometimes it can be helpful to be reminded of the basics, which is why I've done it today. And getting that drip feed of these things are important, these things are helpful, can be useful in changing behaviour. But actually, there's lots of other things that get in the way of us making changes. In our culture, we don't necessarily really promote self-care as a positive thing. It's more of a sort of it's nice to have if you've got time kind of thing. And there is more and more emphasis being put on it, but it's certainly not something that we necessarily prioritise or we're encouraged to prioritise, particularly not in relation to our working life. Although it is changing, and a lot of workplaces now have wellbeing programmes to support their staff, I often find though that the focus is more about the fact that they've worked out that people are more productive if their well-being is positive. So it's all focused around the kind of financial gains of a lot of companies and things like that, rather than an actual belief that people's well-being is important in itself, which, you know, ultimately how people experience their lives, I believe is important in its own right, really. But also, there are lots of practical challenges in the modern world that we face. We don't always have, or we don't feel like we have lots of choice in terms of what we're doing, paying the mortgage, dealing with the school run, all of the things, having to go to work. But it is important to every now and again kind of take yourself out of this feeling of what the status quo is and just maybe be creative and think about what actually could be different. Are there things that could change? And to kind of focus on what your values are, what's important to you and your family, and actually explore whether there are any choices and whether anything could be different. And if you choose to change nothing, then that's absolutely fine. But it's about knowing what decisions you can make and actually making the decisions that make the most sense for you. And the final thing is that it's really helpful if you've noticed somebody that's made changes and you've seen what a difference it has made for you, But if you're not surrounded by other people that have been focusing on their well-being or making changes to their well-being, you're not going to have noticed or have that kind of factual data to help you feel like it's likely to make a difference. So the more you can surround yourself with other people that do think about well-being, the easier it then becomes for this to be something that you focus on. The most compelling data is to actually have a go at some of these things and see whether it makes any difference for you. Not just have a go once or twice, but sustain some practices. So like the mindfulness exercise that we tried, to try and do that over a period of time and just be curious about what, if any, difference it makes, or whether it's something useful for you, and then you can kind of go with that. So I mentioned that we're going to think about kind of further sources of support. And here's a few ideas in terms of kind of self-development. So to make an actual commitment to try something that you've identified today. So whether that's listening to podcasts, watching TV programs, or just exploring the information that's out there in relation to well-being. Charities like Mind have some really good resources on their websites, both in terms of videos, but a lot of worksheets as well, and fact sheets that you can work through. So it's about being curious and just taking yourself on a bit of a journey of exploration. But also using the support around you. So whether it's talking to friends or family or colleagues about how you're feeling and seeing if they can relate or offer any suggestions or a listening ear. And it's not something that we necessarily do very naturally and can feel really intimidating. But actually, it's a really good way of connecting with people. And making yourself a little bit vulnerable by talking about something that you're struggling with can be a way that you can build that connection with other people, and is a really important part of well-being in itself, that kind of social connection. If you're really struggling, you might want to consider speaking to your GP. People don't always associate their GP with their psychological well-being or their mental health, but actually your GP is your first port of call for any aspect of your health, including your emotional needs. And they might be able to help you to understand what's going on for you and think about support or interventions that might be helpful. The first port of call generally for psychological well-being is a service called IAPT, which stands for Improving Access to Psychological Therapies. And these services are available all across the UK, although they are called different things in different areas. And they have a website so you can put in your postcode and find your nearest IAPT service. And they use an approach called cognitive behaviour therapy, which is a psychological approach that is often used to treat anxiety and depression, amongst other things. And you can be referred by your GP, but you could also self-refer as well. As I've mentioned, the employee support is often available now. So it's worth having a look at what your employer offers you. And these can include psychological therapy options, as well as a range of different support. As I've mentioned, there are lots of charities that support with mental health and well-being. Mind is just one of many to have a look at. And lots of people do access private therapy to explore themselves and understand themselves better, and to develop some of the skills that we've talked about today. And obviously this does incur a cost. And one thing I would recommend is making sure that you check any therapists that you work with, that they're professionally registered. So that might be with the BACP, British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy, or it might be the HCPC, which is what clinical psychologists are registered with. But if they are registered in a professional capacity, then that means that somebody is checking up on the work that they're doing and making sure that they're updating their professional skills. Now I've noticed that we have had a question come through, so I'm just going to have a look at that. Do you have any advice for incorporating well-being during the work day? So obviously it depends what your working day looks like, and it's about kind of mapping it out really, and finding where you can slot different elements of well-being into that. And it's kind of about capturing moments and making time. So in some ways, it's almost about saying, when do I need to have a break in my day? Putting that in your diary and then working your work around that. And we're not really used to thinking that way. We're used to thinking about, well, what work do I need to get done? And then filling in if there's any spare time, which so often there isn't. So actually it is about it becoming a priority, talking to perhaps people you work with about making sure that you can fit that in. If you're working from home, which lots of people are, then really trying to create that structure in your day in some ways is easier. And as we talked about a little bit before people came in, that it can be even more difficult when we're doing so much online, that everything becomes back to back. And again, it is about actually scheduling in those breaks where you can, take 5 minutes for yourself. And I'd say it's about being realistic as well. So what, if you can't necessarily have half an hour break throughout the day, but you might be able to take 3 minutes every hour, and trying to sort of slot that in. I suppose the other thing is about trying to incorporate well-being into your day. So if you're having a meeting with somebody, can you do anything within that meeting that actually helps you to feel positive? I've actually known meetings where people do a kind of 2-minute mindfulness practice together at the beginning of the meeting, and I know that that will take a certain type of person to do that, and generally you'd have to be in a setting where you feel comfortable to suggest that, but these are the sorts of practices that actually are becoming more commonplace. So again, it's about kind of opening your mind to it and sort of thinking, well, if this is what I need, how can I actually build it into my kind of awareness? I noticed the next question is, do you have any recommendations for starting conversations with managers, colleagues about being stressed or burnt out? I'd like to think that this is something that managers are inviting discussions about, but I'm aware that that's not always the case, and it's something that I think people don't want to ask because they don't want to know the answer. But ultimately, it's about, I suppose what I would say is, before you have that discussion with your manager or colleagues, that you feel that you've got some understanding about what's going on first. So maybe sound it out first with a friend or somebody that you feel less worried about their reaction, and talk to them about what is it that you're actually struggling, and try and sort of formulate your understanding of it a little bit more, because that will help you to take to your manager a bit more of a considered thinking around what's going on for you, because what your manager's going to want to know is, what can they practically do to help? They're going to want to know what they can change. Generally, managers aren't necessarily so good at just being a listening ear, a sounding board for your difficulties. So, unless that's the relationship you have with them, but they're going to want to know practically what needs to change, what needs to be different about the work that you're doing. And if you can go to them with, if I could do this, this would really help me with my well-being, because then they can look at that and they can say, is that doable or is that not doable within the confines of the role? But also bear in mind, there's a whole spectrum of as I said, mental health and mental illness. And if there are genuine difficulties, then it's about thinking about whether things like occupational health need to be involved, or whether your employer actually has a responsibility to help you to manage your well-being better. Because employers do have responsibilities in relation to this. And, you know, if you need to take sickness from work, then it's important to do that. And I know people are reluctant to do that for mental health reasons, but it's just as much a legitimate reason to take time out. And you can actually take that graph to them and say, look, if I don't take time out, I'm not going to be performing at my best. I'm going to be in this burnt out point. And that kind of information can be really compelling. So I hope that's helpful. If you've got any further questions or you want to ask anything more, then do either put it in the chat, or I'm happy for you to speak up as well. And finally, before we finish, I just want to get you to have a think for a few minutes about what you're going to do differently as a result of this presentation. And think back to what you wondered about at the beginning, what brought you to this session, and have you got what you wanted to out of it? Have you thought about the things you wanted to think about? And have you got any outcomes that you can take from this, that you might just do something, just one thing differently? So that's the end of the presentation. If you've got any questions or thoughts or comments, then please do put them in the chat, or feel free to ask anything. Thank you for the questions we've had so far. Hopefully I covered that enough, but again, if you've got anything you want further clarity on, then I'm happy to hang around.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation, Sarah. It's been really interesting, very informative. I think we will have a couple of questions. I can see people frantically typing. But yeah, just once again, thank you very much from CIBSE West Midlands region to you for turning up twice today to talk about managing your wellbeing. I think it's a really important topic, and it's really good to see professional institutions supporting it being something we do as CPD as much as anything else.
Yeah.
So we have a question in the chat. Making time in the day for yourself during the day, specifically if working from home is vital. So that's a question, more of a comment. Yeah, I agree. I think it can be very hard, can't it, Sarah, with differentiating between home and work when you're working from home?
Yeah, it's a new challenge, really. I mean, in some ways, there are elements of working from home that make it easier to manage our well-being, because we can sort of manage things at home easier. But I think that separation is really important, being able to split off work and having time for yourself. But actually, really, there should be spaces within a working day, if you're in an office or in a building for your work, where you do make that space, and whether you're at home or not, having that time is just so important and makes a big difference, I think.
Absolutely.
We've got some other comments or questions coming.
The suspense.
I know.
I did briefly go through a patch of trying to do yoga in between meetings, just like a couple of stretches. It didn't, when the pandemic first started, didn't carry on.
I've tried that sometimes. I think in an office you have delineated break time and end time. At home you can just keep going. Yeah. I think lots of people have really struggled with that during the pandemic, that it really comes down to your own boundaries and making sure that you're putting those in place. And sometimes it can be just about, at the end of your working day, putting something in place as a bit of a marker, so that you do move, you focus around getting your work finished and then moving from that space into another space.
I think applying boundaries, whether that's home and evenings or anything else, I think is definitely going to be my takeaway from your talk today, is being firmer with myself and others with what my boundaries are and where I draw those lines.
Yeah, so often actually we don't realise that we're having to be firm ourselves, and that we think it's others impressing on our boundaries, but actually it is often that we're letting those boundaries slip, and that we need to be clearer about it. So yeah, I think that's a good thing to take from it.
And Adele says, thanks Sarah, the session has been really helpful, many thanks for your time.
You're welcome.
Would echo that very much. And Joe, similarly, thank you, but I need to leave now. An excellent session. So yes, thank you from our attendees as well. That has been absolutely fantastic. Ella has very kindly recorded it, so it will be available to others who didn't have a chance to attend. So thank you again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Let's draw a boundary now and call it a night and go and
enjoy the rest
some home time.
Thanks very much. Bye.